Kristaps Porzingis is now a Celtic. Shams has officially reported this, that it's close to done. It's just about done at this point. So let's get into it. Listen, if you're new to this, is P.kidd Talks NBA. I appreciate you all supporting the channel. Let's get into it. Right now, the Celtics have actually come up majorly. And I would say, like, it was not a whole lot they needed, but to see what they actually traded, who they actually flipped to actually get Kristaps Porzingis, they really didn't give up a lot. Now, how does this work with Jaylen Brown's contract and stuff like that? That's still to be determined. I don't know exactly how those particulars work out. The Celtics are in a situation where you got to find out how you're going to keep all these particular salaries and max players with Jaylen Brown looking for $295. Good Lord. I don't know if he's worth that, but let's just talk about how Kristaps Porzingis actually helps the Celtics. He actually does things for them that realistically, I would say maybe Al Horford already does, but maybe he does it better. Kristaps Porzingis for the Wizards, if you haven't been watching, and it's the Wizards, not a lot of people watched, but Kristaps Porzingis is somewhat of a 3-level scorer. He can shoot for three. He has a good mid-range, and his post-up numbers for the Wizards was actually freakishly good. He had a really good season with them, and if you look at Kristaps, Kuz, what they were able to build together as far as that synergy there, they actually were a delight to be for the Wizard fans, and no one has really said anything bad about them at this particular point. So this is a huge W for them. Now, what does this ultimately mean for Boston Celtics? I do think that them giving up Malcolm Brogdon was an L. However, because they have so many guards and so many different things like that, they didn't necessarily need a traditional point guard, so to speak, because I mean they still do have Marcus Smart there and things of that nature if he stays there. So they still have that there. They didn't necessarily need Brogdon, but he did help that second unit, especially he was a 6 man a year. He helped that second unit tremendously. Now Kristaps does something that ultimately I think Time Lord doesn't really necessarily do for him, because Time Lord isn't a good shooter from beyond the arc. He's somewhat consistent. I mean, he isn't someone that you would consider elite from either of those things outside of being in the paint. So this is someone who spreads the floor, someone who garners attention, someone when he's cooking can actually demand a double. Those are not necessarily situations you would associate with Robert Williams, and sometimes not even Al Horford. Although I think Al Horford has been a true professional, has shown up for them consistently. I would say, you know, it is one of those things. Now, does this still make them a threat in the East? Well, I'll say this. They were always a threat in the East. They're always a threat in the East, excuse me. That was without question. There was nothing that sit there and tell you that they weren't going to be a dominant force. Now, whether or not they get over the hump is a different thing. Now, if we're going to ask that question, that is still to be determined. Because one of the biggest gripes that anyone has ever had about Kristaps has never been about what he does when he's on the court. It's how often he can stay on the court. Looked like last season that he played majority of the season. So that's a good thing. It's trending in the right direction. But we all know that Kristaps Porzingis has had injury history, has a extensive injury history. It's nothing to sit there and be ambiguous about. That's always been the gripe against him. So if he can stay healthy and if he can actually find pleasure in the role that he's going to have. Kristaps Porzingis, for the most part, hasn't had so many. Well, he was in Dallas, but Dallas didn't have two ball dominant, maybe 3 ball dominant players they have to worry about, in my opinion. Maybe so, but this is a whole different level. You see what Jason Tatum does. You see how Jaylen Brown does. It all depends on the role and how he ultimately fits in. And remember, this is not just 2K. The player has to adapt to the role as well. His role with the Boston Celtics may be a diminished role compared to his starting role with the Wizards. Maybe he's a starter, maybe he's not. Now, some people would say that he should be an automatic starter. I don't think so. I don't think it's an automatic starter, and I also don't think that it would be the right thing to do to run him with that starting unit, mainly because there's only one ball. And if you need help on anything, if you're the Boston Celtics, it's how does my bench unit come in and maintain leads or even fight us back into games? How do we maintain levels of threat when we don't have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on the floor? How do we alternate those particular lineups so we can always have a 2-man game on the floor? I think Jaylen Brown and Al Horford at times had a really good one. Time Lord and Jason Tatum at times had a nice 2-man game with their pick and run, things of that nature. I may have reversed those plays, but either way, you get the point. How do we maintain a high level of a high level threat on the floor at all times? And so them staggering those particular lineups may work out for the best. But I want to hear your thoughts, man. I want to hear your thoughts, especially if you're a Celtics fan. How do you feel about this particular trade? You've pretty much, like, Brad Stevens is like a ship off the old block. He's doing Danny Ainge things at this point because you pretty much got him for like little to nothing. You didn't gut your team. I mean, there's still some moves to be made. It's still an off season. Draft hasn't happened. There's still some other things I'm sure that's going to happen. But ultimately, you really got him for nothing. So how does that help you? Does this get you over the hump? Does this maintain the threat? Is it somebody that, hey, if you all make it back to the finals and you run into a Denver, can you now compete? Which I think that was always the better matchup anyway. I think Denver probably wouldn't be the champs if they had to deal with the Boston Celtics. But I want to hear your thoughts. Whether it's love, whether it's hate, put it in the comments. I'll be in there with you. Till next time. It's going to be a long off season. We got a lot of stuff to talk about.